Welcome to the Recover You podcast. I'm Kylene.
And I'm Patrick.
We are a couple in recovery
From sex addiction
and betrayal trauma. Together, we share our story to encourage you on your journey. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be. Hi, Patrick.
Hi, Kylene.
How are you feeling today?
I'm a little bit off today. I got sick on Friday, so
Not feeling good.
now a little bit better this afternoon, but it hasn't been a very energetic weekend.
So we're gonna do our best through this episode. Thank you for being here.
Mm-hmm.
We are so excited to welcome all of our new podcast listeners. We've had a significant uptick in some of you who are beginning to listen. So welcome. We're so happy that you're here. We hope that the episodes are supportive to your healing, and we're just so glad you're here.
I think it's always exciting when we look at it and we see the different countries.
Oh yeah, super
where
cool.
people are listening to it. So that's really neat.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the topic rebuilding trust after betrayal. So this is a question that came up in the Recovery U community recently, and I thought it would be a good one to talk about because it's a really common question, right? It's what every betrayed partner asks. How in the world will I ever be able to trust again after my partner has lied and manipulated to the point where like I had no idea, right? And so just a couple things before we really jump into this topic. I always like to clarify like what angle we are coming at when we talk about these things. So this particular episode is going to be coming from the perspective of two people that are both actively working in recovery and working towards reconciliation. So that's sort of the perspective. And the reason I say that is because there are various different scenarios, right? Like maybe the betrayed partner really wants to heal and the addicted partner, and we've mentioned this a lot in previous episodes, is gaslighting or blaming or not taking responsibility and that sort of thing. So in those cases, it's going to be very difficult to rebuild trust because so much of trust is based on the betrayer's behaviors through recovery. Mm-hmm. And so one of the foundational pillars there is that they're going to be taking responsibility. And so if you're working towards reconciliation, that is just sort of the basic understanding there. And the other piece to this would be if you are separating. And so if you're separating, trust is still going to be an issue because this was such a big betrayal in your life. And so it's going to be really important to still work on this area, even if you aren't reconciling with your partner. So if you are moving towards separation and divorce, I still encourage you to work with a coach or a practitioner or a therapist because they're going to be able to support you in rebuilding trust with yourself and healing from the wounds of this betrayal. And again, we always encourage that whether you're reconciling, whether you're not, just because this is such a painful thing in life that we want to make sure that these wounds are really actively addressed so that we don't take them into our friendships, our future partnerships, and just really even just the filter we look at the world through. You know, if you ever kind of zoom out and kind of look at people, there's a lot of people that will go through infidelity and just hate men after that, or they'll really hold the belief that like once a cheater, always a cheater, people are irredeemable, right? And so those are beliefs that come out of pain. And so we always encourage, whether you're going to stay with your partner or not, that you work with somebody that can help you heal the wounds and learn how to trust your own intuition and your own gut so that you can move forward in a healthy, happy way in life again. So that being said, this episode is going to be primarily focused on the couple that are both doing the work and really kind of trying to reconcile and deepen their relationship and rebuild that trust together with significant effort on both parts. So I like to start with the idea of, what are the foundations of trust? I think it involves complete honesty, which is, we talked about that a few episodes ago at the beginning of this year, just the importance of honesty. And this is a topic that has really, I think, been on my mind more and more this year. I think we may do one or two more episodes kind of around this idea of deepening vulnerability, improving conversations, really just digging into how you get to uh, the ultimate relationship, if you want to say that, after betrayal, or just in general, right? Like, how do you get really awesome relationships? But I think the foundations of trust, like you have to have honesty. Like that's the whole, it's like the pillar, right? Like, why is trust gone? Because you lied, right? Because there's something hidden, because there was something secret. And so the foundation of trust when you're moving forward in reconciliation is essentially going to be total, complete honesty. And actually, I'm going to throw something in here too from the betrayed partner as well, plus vulnerability, both sides, plus consistency. And that's primarily on the partner who's done the betraying.
Yeah, I think the consistency piece is really, really huge there, because you actually can be, like the full therapeutic disclosure is a very open and honest document, but and it may create a sense of belief in what the person is saying, but it may not cement trust yet. So,
absolutely not. Yeah, because that's one of those things that trust is like destroyed overnight. Like it's destroyed so quickly.
It's like a reputation. They talk about reputations are the same way. Like they can be destroyed from one incident, but it can take a lifetime to build.
Right. And that's why I think that we don't want it to take a lifetime to build. We want it to progress, over time through reconciliation. And so that's why it takes such intentionality. And that's one of the reasons that it's so important to get to the honesty piece quickly. Because when you see couples that the betrayed partner is continuing to do the trickle disclosure, and this is going on for months or years at a time, where there's just been this long-term lack of taking responsibility, lack of complete honesty, let me continue to manipulate even after discovery, that it just continues to shatter the trust. So every time that happens, it makes it more difficult for the betrayed partner. And so here's the thing. If you get discovered and, there's probably always going to be like a little bit of a blip there. I think when you're coming like out of addiction, there's going to be a little bit of a period. And we've sort of talked about that, right? Like a couple weeks to a couple months, maybe, as you're sort of shifting into this place. But that's fairly quickly when you look at the grand scheme of things, compared to sometimes it's years in some cases, right? And so, but if you have someone that gets discovered and then they are very quickly getting into, hey, I'm going to tell you the truth and I'm going to be vulnerable, and no matter what the cost is, there is actually a really, really, really strong possibility that the betrayed partner is going to forgive you and begin to rebuild trust fairly quickly. But the longer that the trickle disclosure, the longer that is drawn out, and the more they have to pull information out of you, and the more that they find without you confessing over time, like from the moment of discovery to whatever point you end up being totally truthful, the longer period of time that is, the more and more difficult it gets for the betrayed partner to give you any benefit of the doubt by the time you actually start telling the truth. And so that's why it's so important and that's why, so I'm going to go through some like 4 points that I think really help people rebuild trust. And some of these are ones that we've talked about multiple times throughout the past couple of years, but I'm just going to bring them up again because this is why. It's because the reason the reconciliation process is this way, it's very well thought out, it's very detailed, it's very structured, is because the point is to rebuild trust and to get people into this phase of honesty so quickly. The question that came up in the group actually was an interesting one, because it was about about rebuilding trust, but while they are physically separated, like they're not living in the same house. And so I do want to just kind of mention that, because you might be listening to this going, well, I do want to reconcile, but we're not living in the same house, or maybe in home separation or whatever. Is it the same? And I'm going to say, broad spectrum, yes, it's the same. The primary pillars of rebuilding trust are going to be the same, whether you are living together or living apart. if you want to move in that direction. If that door is open, then the activities that build trust are going to be the same. Okay, so they might take slightly different shapes, but it's basically going to be the same. So the number one is one that we've talked about a lot. And so I'm not going to go too heavily into it, but it's disclosure. That's essentially why disclosure exists. Now, here's the thing. I just kind of want to mention this. I've seen people skip this part or do their own version of it or anything in between or do the full therapeutic version. I've seen like kind of just a lot of different ways that, so often we don't get the information about, seeing a CSAT or going through the full therapeutic disclosure. And so to their credit, a lot of individuals, and, like we did this as well, you try to do this to some extent on their own, right? And I'm just always going to encourage you, unless you are like so totally sure that you have all the information and you're like 6 years down the road and just like don't want to go back there anymore. If you're kind of still new to the game and you've done your own version or you've skipped to this part or whatever, I'm going to encourage you to go do the full version, the therapeutic version. There's a reason that it is planned out this way. And I've really seen the benefit when people go back, and it's like finding the missing puzzle pieces that kind of make the picture, visible. And so some of the benefits when they're working with a really, really good practitioner helping the addict go through the disclosure is that they kind of pull out any of those little threads of inconsistency, any of the threads that are still there of denial, and they're really working to get them to this place of total honesty and vulnerability. And so going through the therapeutic version is very different than just sort of like trying to remember and creating your own. And you sort of did both, so you can speak to that a little.
Yeah. So in the Conquer series, I think it's I forget. I think it's like lesson 4 or something that talks about having a disclosure, and there's a pretty good little matrix that you can fill out and kind of follow as an example. Along with that, in the Conquer series, as you do your weekly check-in, there's a question: have you lied to anybody this week? And a lot of times, what happens is you hear this: is guys will lie when telling stories to not even their spouse, like whatever, they'll embellish the truth or whatever that is. And so the difference, having done both, having done the Conquer disclosure,
one on your own versus the
right,
one with a therapist,
and the other one is. There is something to facing the person that you've betrayed and really walking through everything you've done. It's
detailed enough that it takes time. It takes a lot of self-reflection.
Yeah. Well, and you talk about breaking denial structures. So, there's when you fill out a small 1-page matrix, you can get a lot of detail on there, and that's great. But when you create a narrative that's multiple pages long that you would then have to read out loud, that's really powerful. It's a really, really powerful step towards breaking your denial structures and getting the truth out there. Because there were so many things that I had kind of forgotten, right? It wasn't that I was trying to keep it from you.
Yeah.
I just flat out forgotten.
Well, and that's true. And there's sometimes where the spouse is intentionally trying to keep it to an extent, right? Speaking of like the denial structures and manipulation, there are situations where a partner will withhold information for a variety of reasons. They think, well, I'm protecting the betrayed partner, or she knows enough. I can't tell her more, or I don't want to tell her more, or they've taken things from different. So I'll give you an example. Someone had gone to therapy. It wasn't CSAT therapy. It wasn't addiction therapy. They went to other therapists. And the bummer about that is that they didn't get put into the reconciliation process very effectively. And so more or less time was wasted in this process. And that was very frustrating for them when they sort of started to find the right tools. But one of the therapists, well-meaning, sort of said, your story can't change. The betrayer took that to essentially mean I can't divulge any new information. And, again, that manipulative sort of addiction brain goes, I'm going to utilize this as an excuse to like, this is it, right? And so I don't actually need to do the work to be honest and be vulnerable and all this kind of stuff. And so it played into the manipulation pattern. Eventually, when he got connected to a CSAT and started going through the full disclosure, and I had recommended the book Radical Honesty as well, and I think that sort of hit him as well. Then they started going through his process, and it was just like, oh my gosh, I realize now how this pattern has hurt my spouse, why it wasn't good enough, how important it is that I show up honestly. And the CSAT that he was working with was like amazing, and just helping him pull out the truth and present this disclosure in a way that wouldn't that have been awesome to do that, years ago. So yeah, so it's a really, really important process. We encourage you to do it with the help of and the guidance of people who do this. Right. But another reason it's such an important step is because it is really, when you're talking about trust, it really creates a landmark for the couple, saying, I know everything that happened before this. And after this point, our relationship is something different now. And so it really gives this is a line, an X on the calendar where everything before this, I just know, right? Because that's one of the things that betrayed partners are really struggling with, is understanding and creating what was reality, what was my reality.
Well, I know that having gone through that process and then backing it up with a polygraph, I think and I've said this before in a previous episode, but what really surprised me coming out of passing the polygraph was the sense of accomplishment that I had, that I could tell the truth, versus I think I went into it thinking I needed to do this for you, so you felt good about the disclosure, but I actually came away from it emotionally feeling like, oh yeah, hey, this is a new part of who I am. And it was a really kind of those steps, incremental steps to rebuilding what was my life as well.
And that's the second thing that I was going to mention was the polygraph. So when you're talking about reconciling or rebuilding trust, you not only want to get the information and the truth to sort of lay that foundation of understanding, but that's still going to be very difficult for the betrayed partner to go, but you lied to me for so long. How do I know that everything in the disclosure was actually complete, was actually honest? Again, kind of going into that pattern of withholding, manipulation, qualifying. We've talked about that in other episodes where addicts will qualify certain behaviors. So how do I know that this is true and complete? And so that's why we really, really, really encourage everyone to go through a polygraph, because trust is honestly one of the hardest parts of the reconciliation process, if not the hardest part. That's the biggest piece of damage that comes from betrayal is the just massive amount of loss in the trust of the relationship. Can I even believe you? Right. And how do I know?
Yeah, there's an emotional comfort that's stripped away from the relationship by this. And so these processes are part of slowly building that emotional comfort back into the relationship.
Yeah. And so again, it's not an overnight thing. It's not like you're going to go through the disclosure, you're going to go through the polygraph and go, oh my gosh, we're great. I believe everything you're saying now. But it does lay a really, really strong foundation when because you would even say, because I would have these little wobbles, right? And I'd be like, well, what about this? And you'd be like, don't forget, I have a follow-up polygraph, in 3 months or something like that, Right. Or don't forget, I just took one, everything is good, right? And so there is a piece to it that works well for both parties, I think, to sort of remind you, the truth has been said. We have verified the truth, because you always say that trust but verify. And as you're rebuilding trust, you have to verify. It would be silly for a betrayed partner to just go, oh yeah, I'm going to take you at your word when you've lied to me for 10 years, right? That's silly. So we really recommend, that's why these processes exist, because this is a really normal thing. All of your emotions that you're feeling are normal. The lack of trust is normal. The fear of a second betrayal is normal. Not knowing if everything in the disclosure is complete is totally valid. And so there's a reason that these are usually paired together. And it's to give you that really strong foundation that says, hey, if you are going to work towards reconciliation, let's start you out on a really strong footing. Okay, so the third thing that I think is one of the most important things that probably, I don't know if it's talked about enough, is throughout reconciliation and the rest of your relationship, having ever evolving and ever deepening conversations about literally everything in life.
Mm-hmm.
I think as you, let's say you've done the disclosure, you've done the polygraph, as you learn, this is the vulnerability piece, as you learn to communicate with complete honesty about everything in your life and everything in your relationship, and learn how to do it in a way that works for both of you, it's just a different level of connection.
Mm-hmm.
And as you get used to that, and again, it sort of builds on that foundation. Okay, now we have truth. Now we need what? We need connection and vulnerability to continue creating something that's not just, hey, we're surviving in this relationship together, right? So when I say ever evolving conversations, I mean literally about everything. I'll actually often get questions that sound something like, I feel this way. Should I tell my spouse? And my answer, again, we're talking about two people that are actively working towards reconciliation. We're not talking about, hey, do I bring this up to somebody that's just going to gaslight me and throw it back in my face? No, but I'm talking about two people that are actively working towards connecting. My answer is almost always yes. What's in your head should come out of your mouth, because if it doesn't, they have no idea how to respond and how to support you through that. And that goes both ways. So the addict has to be really honest through his recovery. And I will tell you, I will see so many betrayed women that go through this. It's like a light switch when the betrayed or the betrayer, the addict, when he starts voluntarily sharing emotions and communicating, it is like an immediate brick in the trust wall. Because they go, oh my gosh, this has never happened before. This is different. And what a betrayed partner is really looking for, they're very much looking for like all of the signs that something is different. Because if everything's the same, they're going to keep asking that question. Well, how do I know? How do I know? How do I know? How do I know? Right.
And so, some relationships are different, but I think sometimes the betrayed has to recognize that the betrayer might start voicing some things that could be a little bit, I don't know about shocking to hear, but like the person might say, hey, I don't like it when you do that, or I don't feel good in this situation, or something along. Now, there's certainly a time frame, right? You don't want to do that in the first 3 months, but as the person develops this honesty over the years, right, you may find he goes, hey, I thought the way you said that to me, I think you hurt my feelings, right? Or maybe that person never said that before. Like that's actually not a bad thing. You want that. All of us have the right to kind of voice how we feel in a given. I think it's a little bit maybe of a challenging, and I don't want to send the wrong message here. Like, you don't want to tell your betrayed spouse after month one that you're sick and tired of answering her questions. That's probably inappropriate. But
That's definitely inappropriate.
Right. But what you do want to get to a point in your relationship, 2 years on, 3 years on, where if something is bothering you and it's from that other spouse, you want to express that.
I think that's
the
that's
freedom
again,
to express that.
reiterating that both parties are doing the healing work.
Right.
So you want to have two people that are both, if possible, talking to coaches or practitioners or therapists. If possible, both parties are involved in that, that are identifying the wounds from the addiction, from the betrayal, and they're learning how to communicate in healthy ways to each other. Mm-hmm. And so ultimately what you want is two people that see each other completely and are playing tennis in terms of supporting each other, right? It's not a power over thing. So when you say that, it's basically both people should always feel free. Both should feel totally safe in the relationship to express their feelings and their emotions and their thoughts and their fears and their insecurities.
Well, and part of the reason I bring this up, and I think it's really important, is because I think what leads to relapse, acting out, seeking out of soothing behaviors is where a man, which is a pretty typical behavior of a man, will go, never mind, I won't say anything, I'll just handle it myself. And that's a fairly typical response for a man. I think in a lot of ways, men are expected to just manage it, right? And so, as you get into this, if the man is just maybe the man's trying to figure it out, and because you still do need to be kind, you know what I mean? Like you always have to be kind in how you do things, but if he's exercising a muscle that he's never exercised before.
Well, I'll say that. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. So you did that a couple times. It was funny. So, well, let's rewind for just a second. So, how do we explain this so it's like super clear? I don't know if we can give maybe an example or something. So, I think I remember 2, maybe 3 instances where you were trying to flex this muscle of, hey, I get to show up in the relationship and have opinions too, right? Because for so long, rightfully so, in the beginning, it was like very being empathetic to the betrayed partner, me, and saying, like, how do I show up in a way that like makes you feel safe? Well, at some point, as the safety is truly established and as you're really truly in recovery, then, and we've talked about this, the dynamic in the relationship balances back out to be equal partnership again. And so that at that point, you may have gone a significant period of time not really, feeling comfortable to I don't know what the word is. I don't want to say criticize, but like have an opinion, really, yeah, right? Yeah. Maybe have an opinion. And so so what you're essentially saying is you need to be able to disagree in a healthy way.
Right.
You need to be able to have conflict, or I don't even want to say conflicting opinions in a healthy way, so that it's received, it's communicated, it's talked about, it's not shut down.
Right.
And so that is important, both directions. Everything that we say is always both directions. You never want to have a dynamic where one partner, either one, is walking on eggshells in the relationship. Right. When you're talking about long-term stuff. That ex can be walking on eggshells for a little while. That's normal. Yeah, but I mean long term.
It's like it's okay for an addict to say, "Hey, this is hard." Right? It's okay to say, "Hey, this is hard." But that's where your groups come in. So you know that you're supposed to go to your groups and be like, "Boy, my wife just kicked my butt. She kicked my butt for not physically, but like was going." And that's where that mentor or that group leader goes, "Hey, I get it. You know what I mean? Like it's another.
And sometimes, well, yeah,
right, yeah, because that's
sometimes
deserved.
They go,
right? Yeah,
well,
yeah.
Exactly. What did you expect?
But as you're right, and our Charles was on this podcast too. He talked about it being like a seesaw. So a seesaw has to, at some point, it has to level out and it has to be perfectly horizontal across, and you have to find that balance, and that's where because nobody does everything perfectly. You're pretty close. But you're pretty close. But not everybody does everything perfectly, and good relationships. And if you think about good teams and good organizations, they have outlets so people can express discontent.
I wish we could think of an example for this,
like that.
Because what came to mind when you were talking about this was when you tried to flex this muscle, it was very triggering to me. Maybe the first time you did it. So because the dynamic shifts naturally, as it should, in the beginning stages of recovery, where I sort of had to be in charge of everything, and you were sort of in the receiving end of boundaries and accountability, and like it sort of like took a lot off your plate because you had to survive and you had to get in recovery. Like that was your job, right? And then my job was to kind of oversee and make, and that's okay for a period of time until it's not. But you get into patterns, and once you get into patterns, it can be uncomfortable to shift them again. Right. And so I think that's a little bit of what was happening. You were like, hey, like if I have thoughts or whatever, like I need to be able to share them. But the way that it happened, because it was shifting the dynamic back again, and it had been a little while since, or I don't know how to explain that. Maybe you felt like you never did that. I don't know. But you approached me a couple times in a really, I felt like it was a harsh way. It was very direct, very, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. Commanding would be a good word. And I was like, I am not having this. You don't get to boss me around. Like, this is not going to work long-term. So you need to figure this out.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is,
okay, but to be clear, I don't get to boss you around either.
Right.
Okay. So, and we both need to be able to
Mhm.
Although I probably get a bossy around a little bit more than
Well, what's interesting is, this is where resentment plays in, because resentment's a really powerful emotion that sits in a lot of us. So, what can happen is, and I remember our example, the one was, and I think I've talked about this before in the podcast, but it was November. Discovery was in the end of January, it was November. And you had said during a discussion or something that you'll never travel by yourself again. So I immediately internally became resentful, like, how the heck can you do that, right? And so, that's just an example, right? Where what would have been a very healthy thing is to say, well, hold on, let's talk about what are your concerns about traveling? What would allay those concerns, right? But resentment prevents you from doing that. And then on the flip side, on your side, resentment says, how dare you push back? Don't you remember what you've done to me?
Right.
Versus like, hey, this is good. He's starting to express, hey, did I say anything that because I want us to return to it, but nobody's is that well equipped.
No,
ever,
and let's be clear, we're all going to make mistakes as we, as you say, rebalance the seesaw. I don't know if we're being clear enough about what that looks like, but but yeah, we had bumps in the road. And so you would sort of try to forcefully communicate something that did not need to be forcefully communicated. And then I was like, I don't like the way you're communicating this. This is not, you're going to have to figure this out. And you did. And we sort of worked through that. And I think that what happened was we were able to then communicate, like, what was the intention behind it. And then we could get on the same page.
Well, I never wanted to be unkind. I think that was it. And sometimes, once again, resentment builds anger, right? It starts to build, and then you say something, and versus like, hey, find a way to in a way express what you're feeling. And
again, clarifying, both sides of the street have to provide safety for the other person to be able to communicate those. Because if you're not feeling safe bringing up your emotions, then it's going to be more likely that those types of things happen more frequently. And so inevitably they will happen. Somebody's going to say something and it's not going to be done right. And so how you respond to that and then how you provide safety in the future is going to help minimize that as much as possible.
If I could real quick on that too. It's also, this is important, I think, for the couples to recognize, is just because what we're talking about, lead with empathy, sometimes you don't, right?
Right.
But you can respond with empathy after you've done something. So you can
repair,
you can come back in and say, hey, I was a little bit more harsh than I wanted to do. Let me kind of reframe what I was trying to say here. And those kinds of efforts are really, really good, because we're all emotional beings, and most reasonable people recognize the emotion that exists in all of us. And so, we're not going to get everything right, but don't be afraid to reframe. Don't be afraid to come back and say, hey,
we both apologize to each other probably a lot.
Yeah. Just say, hey, I shouldn't have come across the way I did. This is what I was concerned with, etc.
So we just had an example of one of those conversations that we're talking about right here on the podcast just now.
Did I win?
talking about deep conversations. No, but that we're on topic, but we're off topic. But yeah, the third point is basically continue to have these deeper conversations. And I think that is really going to end up building trust. And when I say conversations about everything, sorry, Coco just hopped up here. When I say conversations about everything, I mean literally everything. So, as you guys are progressing through recovery, you guys have to, you don't have to do anything, but we find it helpful to have ever evolving conversations around sex. And I mean, like, every part of it. Like, what are you looking forward to? What are you feeling insecure about? What did the betrayal take from you? Where do you want this part of your relationship to go? I think we're going to do another episode specifically on intimacy at some point, because that's a like trust. It's another piece that's like incredibly difficult for a lot of people to navigate, myself included. It was really, really hard. So, what is the trauma around it? What do you want to work towards? And, I talk about that with my clients a lot, is like working towards a vision. It's like you getting super clear on what the vision of your relationship is, and making sure that you and your partner, at least in some sense, are on the same page of what that looks like. So you're working towards the most destabilizing points of recovery for me were when I felt like we weren't on the same page about something.
Well, what's interesting is, they talk about the opposite of addiction is connection. And so you think about everything that we're talking about is, going up, whether it be the trust ladder, whether it's communicating effectively or what you want from an intimacy standpoint. All of these things are connection. And so addiction, as we've talked about, is a brain problem, and it creates these patterns. And you don't just stop addiction and become very well connected. It takes practice.
Oh, yeah.
It takes intense effort to push yourself and to create new patterns that seek connection. And within that, from a couple, is you have to almost provide a reward on either side, so the person seeks connection again. And if you just shut it down, whatever that attempt at connection may be, then you're going to cut off that ultimate connections that are going to, because you're trying to create these new brain patterns that see reward in connection, because there was, for whatever you can say, the addiction pattern, right? So you want to create a different pattern that has reward as part of being connected.
Well, I think essentially what you're talking about is safety. So when you started telling me that you had anxiety or whatever, like when you started going through this process and starting to share your emotions and stuff like that, what would have happened had I not provided a safe place for that?
Well, I would have just probably been like, well, it's just not safe to share these things.
Yeah.
It's not.
So, I mean, well, I guess my question
would
would have been, did I
reinforce-
provide a safe place for
Yeah,
that?
you did. I think it would have reinforced, though. I think had you reacted negatively to it, it would have reinforced a pattern of, well, you just need to solve it yourself again.
Mhm.
You just need to work through your emotions,
Mhm.
our couple emotions on your own,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And
Well, and
that
so
would have
for
been
betrayed
like being a
spouses,
dry drunk at that point.
right. And so for betrayed spouses going through this, I think it might be important to say, like, because some of them are going to see their partner starting to share emotions and go, oh my gosh, this is a green flag. This is, for other partners, maybe they don't know that that's a green flag. And they're like, whoa, what is this? All of a sudden you're like this emotional person. Like you used to have it all together. You used to be super chill about everything. You used to not worry about everything. You used to like, handle everything without stress. Like I viewed you as like a stress-free person. And now all of a sudden you're telling me like you're overwhelmed. Like, so that might be really shocking for some betrayed partners. So I think that maybe is just an important point to note. That's actually a really good sign, because what they're doing is they're starting to feel emotions that they've been medicating up to this point. And particularly in the first 6 months to a year, it might be overwhelming, both for them and for you, because it might be a lot that they've been medicating, and it can feel, when you've been numb for a long time, like an overwhelming whoosh of like, I don't understand what's happening to me, because they're not. Imagine going from like nothing to like, okay, well now I have a lot of feelings, right?
Yeah.
About a lot of things.
Right.
Plus you're in this, it's not just feelings about life. It's not just feelings about the trauma. It's not just feelings about the woundings. Now you're dealing with feelings about your relationship being on the rocks and being
Mhm.
discovered. And like, so there's a lot, right? There's a lot
Right.
that happens there too. So
Yeah, there's a whole, what happens is, if the addict is not rewarded for sharing their feelings, it will reinforce that mindset of, nobody really wants to see me for who I am.
mhm.
And that's one of a really, it's kind of a shame. It contributes to shame. It contributes to all this. So if people don't like me the way I am, well, then I might as well not be who I am by
Right.
engaging in other behaviors.
Well, and that actually brings up a really good point, because I think the whole point of reconciliation should be that both of you can be showing up completely, authentically, truly yourself, because so that you can see and accept and love your partner for who they are, and vice versa. Because if that's ultimately not what you're going to end up with, what kind of a relationship is that, right? If you can't see and love and accept your partner, and they can't see and love it and accept you, it's not going to be. I mean, it's not going to be a fun relationship.
No,
Yeah,
not.
it's not going to be a safe relationship.
Right.
In the most basic sense of the word, it won't be safe, because you'll be walking on eggshells, to going, oh, I can't talk about this, or if I say this, it's going to trigger them, or right? And again, a lot of these kinds of things that we're talking about are further down the road, like year 2, year 3. This isn't like the first 6 months. This isn't the first 9 months. Like those are different conversations. Those are conversations about boundaries. Those are conversations about, sobriety, about checks and balances, about how group is going, about what you're learning in therapy, that sort of thing. These are sort of deeper. But my point with the conversation, rebuilding trust, is that the conversations continue to evolve as your healing evolves. And when you get into year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, you really want these conversations to shift and continually shift, where you're both individually focusing more on individual and personal growth, and then growth in the relationship as well. So the conversations get deeper, the trust gets deeper, the relationship gets deeper, the connection gets deeper. All of those things continue to improve once the foundations of sobriety and recovery those boxes are checked. We're good with that. We're gonna build on it.
Mm-hmm.
So conversations around sex, conversations around triggers, right? So a lot of times, like I said, I'll have people go, should I tell my spouse this? Yes, absolutely. Now here's my biggest tip, and I stole this from your therapist, but I've passed this on so many times, and every single time a betrayed partner utilizes this, they are like changes the game. And so that is, again, a little bit further along the road. When you are noticing that your husband has been sober for a while, he's in recovery, you guys are doing pretty well, but triggers keep coming up. And you have the question of like, how long do I keep bringing these up? Because again, what's in your head needs to come out of your mouth. But I'm going to put a very special caveat on this one for triggers. And this will totally change how you guys communicate. And that is, when you have a trigger, instead of communicating the trigger, you communicate the underlying need. And it's really, really important, because it does several things. One, it helps you start evaluating, why is that image coming up in my mind? Why is that emotion coming up in my body right now? And so when you're able to answer that question, most of the time is something like, well, I need reassurance right now, or I'm feeling insecure right now. Like, so for a very specific example, like if you have an image or a memory or something's coming up about a behavior, and one of the stickiest trigger points for a lot of betrayed partners is the comparison issue between their bodies and the bodies of, whatever, the women or videos or whatever. And so let's say it's a comparison trigger. Then if you're able to go, how does that make me feel? Or what is the need underneath this? Well, it's a need for reassurance, or it's a feeling or a fear of insecurity, right? Or, something like that. When you're able to identify that, you can just ask, like, what's underneath this to yourself several times until you feel that your body resonates with the answer. Then you can actually take that to your partner and say, hey, you can say, I was just triggered by something, or I had a memory or whatever. But instead of going into the memory and saying, hey, can you tell me more about this behavior that you did, which is going to be more triggering for you and more triggering for your partner to have to go back in and remember stuff, you can just say, hey, I'm feeling a little triggered right now. I had a memory pop up. I need a little reassurance. That not only helps you bring an awareness, understanding to the surface, but it helps your partner show up for you. And then they can answer that call. And instead of a trigger that's going to push the intimacy and the connection away from each other through the conversation, this type of approach actually brings you guys closer together and deepens the intimacy. And so if you can shift the way you talk about this, it can actually help bring you closer, instead of every time you have a trigger pushing you further apart.
Yeah. And I would say for the betrayers in this, triggers are going to happen, much like you're starting to express your own feelings and whatever those anxieties and whatever it is. Triggers are a part of this process. And so, basically saying, much like it's unfair for a partner to say to you that you can't express your feelings, you can't say to them that they can't express whatever they're feeling on a trigger. That's not, or the emotions.
You're saying you a lot. So the betrayed partner versus the addicted, like which one are you talking about?
I'm talking about the addicted. The addicted has to recognize, because as uncomfortable as triggers can be for the addicted, when they've done all this work,
Yeah.
they've done all this stuff, all of a sudden, like, why are you continuing to get triggered? It's part of this process. It's all part of it. There's debris in there. You wake up one morning and you had maybe too much sugar as opposed to protein, and your body fires differently. I mean, there's all kinds of different things. So be prepared as the addicted, much like we were talking in the earlier segment about being able for the betrayed to, I'm sorry, for the betrayer.
Yeah, I'm getting confused.
Sorry. The point is that you're both showing up. If one is allowed to express emotion, then the other has to express emotion, has to be allowed to express emotion too. And so just be aware that the more you express emotion, then the more you express emotion, it's going to lead to more expression of emotion. And it might mean that sometimes there's some uncomfortable things that keep coming out. So I like to say, hold the water for each other, hold it there, because it's a really important thing. It's important for all of those things to come out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry if I was a little confused.
No, that's okay. It was, yes, and I think it combined with my ADD brain, I got disconnected for a moment, and then I go, wait, what's happening? No. But I think, it plays into the points that we were talking about earlier. Triggers happen on both sides. Both parties have triggers, and both parties should be able to come to the other person in a safe space and communicate. And it's going to look a little different if the addicted is coming to the betrayed partner versus if the betrayed partner is coming to the addicted. And we actually, a lot of times we'll say, and you mentioned this earlier, a lot of times if it's like an actual trigger with the addicted partner, they want to have a safety net of like, hey, I called Joe in my group today, and we processed XYZ, and I just want to let you know, like, I'm just telling you that it came up. Like, so the communication pathways are open. And if it was something that actually threatened sobriety or whatever, it's already been handled. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So communication about everything. We could keep going on about different types of communication, but we will move on. So in terms of building trust, we have the disclosure, which lays the foundation of honesty. We have the polygraph, which lays the foundation of trust that what is being told is true. We have ever evolving conversations. So it progresses depending on what phase you're in, what types of conversations you're going to have. But the idea here is that you are choosing actively to provide safe spaces for each other to talk about your emotions both directions. It's really, really important. And I'm going to say too that it's going to be important to talk to each other and have conversations about life and your relationship goals as you go through this. Again, that vision, moving towards it. It's always okay. And sometimes this might come from the betrayed partner, but maybe sometimes this might come from the addicted partner as well at some point. It's always okay to say something to the effect of, hey, I'm really glad we're here, and I see how much progress you've made or how much progress I've made or we've made or whatever. Like, I'm really glad, and I recognize this, and this is awesome, and I'm validating all this work, and I'm not okay staying where we are right now forever. Like, it's very much okay to communicate that you want to continue progressing in your emotional intimacy life, in your physical intimacy life, in the way you guys connect or talk to each other. Maybe communication is a struggle, and like that's something that you really want to work on as you continue this process, right? So whatever it is that you're identifying as maybe a weak link in your relationship armor, it's okay to say, like, I see that you're going to therapy. I see that you're doing the work. I see that this is really progressing, and I'm really proud of you, and I want to support you, and I am acknowledging everything that you and I have done to get to this point at year like 1.5, right? Like we would say something like that. And I still want to keep working on this because it's not where I want it to be right now. I know that we can do better, and that's totally okay. And I think I mentioned this earlier too, kind of in the topic of conversations and relationship and building trust. One of the number one things a betrayed partner is going to look for is proactive safety from her partner. And so that looks like all the little things, like just, being where you say you're going to be, like do what you say you're going to do, show up on time, like be consistent with all of those little things. It is so totally the little things. It's always the little things. They really add up in the long term. And so it's showing up on time. Be where you say you're going to be. Call if you're going to be late. Call ahead of time if you know your schedule is going to change. Anticipate certain patterns or triggers. As you guys have communicated over time and you learn about this, you can actually proactively anticipate a trigger, create a safety pattern around it, and communicate ahead of time if you think that something is going to be, potentially upsetting. Like, this is a great example. For Valentine's Day, one of the things you got me was a massage, a couple's massage, and you had pre-booked it for like 2 or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, whatever it was, out in the future. And you said, it was supposed to be this week. And you said, you got a male massage for you and a female massage therapist for me. But it was a couple's massage and it was on this date. And I'm like, oh, that's great. Right. So first of all, you made sure that it was safe. Right. Then the company called you and said, hey, the male massage therapist, I don't know, he had an injury or something. He has an injury, and so he's not available for that day. And so, anticipating safety and being proactive about safety, you decided to just not make it an issue. And you're like, we'll find another time when there is a male massage therapist available, so that it doesn't even become a trigger for me. It doesn't even, it's not even putting up
relaxing, which is the goal of the massage.
And so it's just a small example of those types of behaviors. They really add up. And so the betrayed partner is really looking for that proactive safety to be created. If there's a change in plan, letting them know ahead of time, obviously, and this is going to be a big one, is like respecting the boundaries that are set. And in certain situations, that's going to mean that the addicted party is coming to the betrayed party if any boundary has been crossed, so that she doesn't have to find out about it. Right. So preferably just respecting them and not crossing them. But if anything has happened, being proactive. It's that, and I really cannot emphasize that enough after talking with so many women, that the proactive communication and the honesty is really what they're looking for. There are so many women that are willing to go to the extreme of empathy and forgiveness to save this relationship. I mean, really, just the ends of the earth to forgive and express empathy when they think that their partner is making an effort. And it's like, man, if you can get to the honesty part and be sincere and be empathetic and communicate, you're going to have a strong chance of keeping the relationship together. So, okay. And then the last thing, and I'm not going to go into this. It's just going to be a little bullet point. I mentioned it at the beginning, but I'm just going to encourage you to pursue this as well. The fourth thing about rebuilding trust together for the betrayed partner, well, and I also think for the addicted, actually, maybe you can speak to that, but for the betrayed partner, it's going to be working on learning how to trust yourself again. One of the biggest comments I hear from women very frequently is, how can I trust myself when I didn't see the red flags? I didn't know that this was happening. Or maybe looking back, there were some signs and now I feel like my intuition failed me, or I feel like I ignored them or whatever, right? And so there's this my foundation has shattered in terms of like, how do I even know that I can trust my gut? Most of the time when I talk to people, if we really go back and look at it, your intuition was always right. And so when we were able to kind of pull proof of that, we can kind of reiterate like, okay, no, actually, we just need to learn how to trust it more. Like we need to lean into our intuition more deeply. It didn't necessarily fail us, but working with a coach or a therapist or a practitioner in this area that can kind of help you with that. And then also, I think a big part of trusting yourself is going to be processing the wounding that has happened from this betrayal. And that's going to help both you as an individual, but also for sure, the coupleship. I think if I had not done all of the limiting belief work, if I hadn't done all the subconscious processing, if I hadn't done all of those steps that I had done, I don't know that we could have gotten where we are, for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think from the addict side, I was reminded of this as you were talking about trusting yourself. So, I have a boundary when I travel that I won't turn on the TV.
Oh, right.
And so there are a couple of hotels that will have a welcome screen on the TV.
When it's turned on
the room, right?
Yeah.
And so I actually I traveled three times, and the very first time that happened was like a year and a half ago. I was like, oh my gosh, like I violated a boundary or whatever. Yeah, yeah. So
No.
like this time I just walked in and turned the TV off. You know what I mean? So it's like you recognize that like, hey, you can trust yourself. Like it's okay. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's and I think that's part of recovery is you're getting back to normal, clean, everyday activities.
Right.
You know what I mean? That
Well, also trusting your brain and all of your emotional parts that they ultimately want the best thing for
that's
you.
right. That's right. Yeah.
So
And you
that
know what to do.
yeah, and that you know what to do. And so it's like we trusting that if you come from the perspective that all of your emotional parts have your best interests at heart, then even when they show up in ways that you don't want, it allows you to shift your perspective to be more compassionate and gentle and loving and ask questions so that ultimately you're still in control.
Mhm.
As opposed to if you're afraid of it or don't trust it or are scared of it, right? Then that's more of a reaction that is going to feel way out of control.
Right.
And so actually I think just deeply knowing
Mhm.
that when these thoughts or emotions or whatever come up, they're trying to communicate something, a need or something, a conversation you need to have, or, kind of like what I was talking about with the women or the betrayed partner earlier. What is the trigger there for? It's the same idea. Like, how can I offer compassion towards that? Well, actually, I just need some reassurance, or I need a hug, or I want to feel more connected right now. Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, this was a longer episode, I think, maybe. How's your throat doing? You feeling okay?
I need a lozenge.
You need a lozenge. Okay. Well, thank you for being here today and for recording this anyway.
You're welcome.
I'm sure everyone appreciates it. So just to recap, to rebuild trust, we need a foundation of total honesty. And I mean complete 100%. Like the two of you have no secrets from each other. And for me personally, I believe that needs to go both directions. In that, no secrecy, total honesty. This is going to lead to more vulnerability, which is totally crucial. Vulnerability is going to begin creating this emotional intimacy and this safety together where you just really feel when you feel like you can talk to your partner about anything and they're going to provide a space to hold that with you, that is bringing your relationship to the next level. And then seeing behaviors and attitudes and the safety and communication happen consistently over time. If you're doing all of those things, I bet you're going to start rebuilding trust together. And so within that is disclosure, the polygraph, deeper conversations, and learning how to trust yourself again. We hope this episode has been helpful, and we will see you next week. Woohoo! If you're listening to this, it means you've made it through an entire episode. Part of recovery is spending time engaging in healing and self-growth activities. We are thankful that you chose our podcast to be one of those activities today. Make sure you reward yourself for that accomplishment. If you've enjoyed this episode or this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please take just a few moments to leave a rating and review, letting us know your experience with Recover You. We not only love hearing how these episodes are helpful, but ratings and reviews help others just like you who are searching for recovery information and support find the podcast too. We can't wait to hear from you. See you next week.